So we just finished discussing some of the ideas from Sonia Lubomirski's video about what kinds of things actually determine happiness. And we're going to shift now to another dialogue, which is around what do we know actually makes it harder for us to be happy. In an earlier video, we talked about how there were some misconceptions about happiness, right? This idea that happiness equals feeling pleasure all the time in every place, and we've acknowledged that that's not a realistic or helpful way to think about or define happiness. We've also noted the idea that striving for happiness or expecting pleasure and happiness all the time can be counterproductive. And we've landed on the more nuanced notion that happiness has a lot more to do with meaning and engagement with other people and contributing to something outside of yourself, what we might call the greater good. Now I want to talk about some of the mental habits, some of the ways that we think that make it actually hard for us to pursue or understand or think about happiness in a constructive way. These are some of the reflexes that we have that lead us astray or present obstacles in the pursuit of happiness. First, I want to touch on an idea that Sonia brought up in an earlier video called hedonic adaptation. Hedonic adaptation is essentially a fancy word for getting used to things. So when we think about happiness as satisfying a pertinent need, maybe I really am hankering for some chocolate and somebody gives me some chocolate, and in that moment that I had the hankering, it's super satisfying, and then somebody else gives me some chocolate, and then another person sort of walks up and hands me a box, and by the fifth or sixth offering, the chocolate is not so good, right? I'm no longer feeling pleasure from that initial thing that I really wanted. This is an example of hedonic adaptation. And when we think about happiness as pleasure or always having our needs met or trying to feel pleasure over and over again when our needs are met, we're bound to an endless pursuit. If you think about happiness in the context of people pursuing material goods, so you have one car, you're super happy with it, it makes you feel good, but then you look next door and your neighbors have a fancier car, so you need the next fancy car, and then you actually learn that someone has a boat, and then you need a boat, and again, you see what's happening. You're going up in happiness, but then adapting, going up in happiness and then adapting. And once again, there is no end to that pursuit. So knowing that's how we function is helpful as we think about how to really pursue happiness in a more meaningful way. Another issue that we struggle with in terms of trying to think about pursuing happiness is that sometimes we're not really great judges of what's going to make us happy or how long things will make us happy. And this comes from work that's been done by Dan Gilbert at Harvard University. So Dan Gilbert has something which he calls affective forecasting. And what that means is predicting how much a life event is likely to impact you. And what happens is, generally, on average, people think that really good events are going to make them happy and keep them happy for a very long time, and that really bad events are going to crush them for the unforeseeable future. But given a psychological immune system, which is what Dan Gilbert calls it, we actually tend to get over things that are heartbreaking quicker than we predict, and things that we think are going to be the answer, that are going to make us happy for the long run, we adapt to those also. So understanding this habit, this idea that we're inclined toward making predictions about what make us happy that aren't necessarily true is important. One of the key studies that Dan Gilbert did to demonstrate this phenomena of affective forecasting involved asking 571 undergrads who were in romantic relationships or who had recently broken up to predict their affective reactions to this experience. So he separated them into three groups. Those that had broken up within the last 2 months, those who had not broken up, and he asked those who had not broken up to say how happy they were and to anticipate or to predict how happy they would be if they had broken up. And what he discovered was that those who had never broken up but were predicting how they would feel 2 months later, predicted a big decrease in their happiness. But then when he asked the people who had broken up how happy they were just as happy as the people who had never broken up. And the suggestion is, again, that our psychological immune system enables us to recover from these heartbreaking events much more quickly than we anticipate that they will. And this is one of the things that make it hard for us to think about happiness in a very realistic way. Another challenge or obstacle to happiness is relating it to the accumulation of things. And this is a little bit related to the hedonic treadmill story that I told earlier, but I want to give a case example from Tom Gilovich, who is a professor at Cornell of psychology. So Tom Gilovich does studies that look at the differences in happiness that are related to material possessions versus experiences. And what he does is ask people to look back at a time when they've spent a bunch of money on a thing or spent a bunch of money on an experience, and ask them how happy you are. And then he asks them a little bit later to talk about or to rate how satisfied they are with that particular that experience of having spent money on a thing. And it turns out that satisfaction goes down a lot when he's looking at the people who have spent their money on material possessions, and satisfaction sort of persists in the upward direction. It goes up and it increases when people invest in experiences. So again, these are some of the sort of habits of thinking, expectations that we have. We should get things. We should worry about how hard challenges in life are going to be that don't fit into our scientific understanding for what brings people the greatest amount of happiness. The last thing I want to touch on is the way people think about happiness and money. What you tend to find when you ask or survey people about what do they think is going to give them happiness is that there is a frequent claim that money is going to be part of the equation. And furthermore, the relationship to that statement is that the more money there is, the happier I'm going to be. It's going to be this sort of upward linear thing. More money, more happiness, more money, more happiness, more money, more happiness. But what we figured out, or what Danny Kahneman from Princeton University has discovered by looking at the relationship between money and life satisfaction or happiness, is that there is indeed an increase in happiness when you think about the income levels that allow people to have their basic needs met. But once you get to a certain threshold, which in his study was about $75,000 a year, once you hit that threshold, the line plateaus. Happiness doesn't continue to go up. So again, there isn't a good case to suggest that continually seeking more and more money is going to continually increase your happiness. So again, I'm just trying to point out some of the obstacles in the way we think about the world and ourselves that might make it harder to pursue happiness.